Hello, welcome friends. Today we're going to discuss the topic of making time to read when you're busy studying and working and having a really difficult time finding some time for yourself and reading. So a while ago I made a chatty TBR video that I really enjoyed doing, and I think you guys also really liked it, so I wanted to do more of these kind of sitting on the ground, casual, chatty videos where we discuss a topic in a kind of podcast style way, so you can just kind of listen to them while you're doing other things and maybe join in on the conversation in the comments. So if you like this kind of video, definitely let me know. For now I'm calling it Let's Talk Books because I'm kind of lacking in creativity when it comes to titles at the moment, but we'll just see where this goes. Also, I got a new microphone for my camera, which means I'm now legit, which means I am now allowed to make these kind of sit down talking videos, right? Because I now have better audio, so what else am I gonna do, right? So, before we get to the topic of today, I wanted to kick this off with a little currently reading. So I'm actually currently reading like 4 books, but I'll talk about the 2 that I'm reading the most right now. First off, I'm reading Girls with Sharp Sticks. This is a YA dystopian that was published last year, but it has that nostalgic 2010 dystopian feel to it. It's about a bunch of girls that are in this academy that are taught to be obedient and pretty and well-behaved girls, but they're kind of slowly figuring out that there's some shady business going on, and I'm really enjoying this one. And then the other one that I am reading is Star Daughter by Shweta Thakrar. I got this in a fairy loot box. If you haven't seen my fairy loot unboxing, I highly recommend watching it because I also tested out all the items and I had a lot of fun with it. But this was the book that was in there, so spoiler, I guess. And this one's also fun, but I'm kind of having a little bit more of a hard time getting through it because the plot is not the most interesting to me at the moment, but I do like the lore of the main character being half star. But, of course, what we're gonna talk about today is how do you actually make time to read the books that you want to read now that, you know, studying and work has begun again for a lot of us. So I could have like made a different style video, more high production style video about, you know, 10 tips to read more when you're studying. But I specifically opted to do a more laid back discussion video because although I do want to give some tips, and I'll get to that later towards the end, I do also just have some thoughts on this topic that I wanted to discuss today. Because I think that this constant need and question of how do I read more books when I'm studying, how do I do that? I really think that stems from a kind of stress to constantly be reading a lot of books, and that it somehow really matters how many books you're reading. Because like I totally get it, you know, you're it's summer break. I was reading like 5-6 books a month, and then school starts and university starts and it just like drops and I have like no motivation to read. And when I do read, I do really enjoy it, but I definitely get like way less books per month, and I just feel bad about it because I'm not reading as much as before. I just want to say, isn't that a bit weird that we constantly have this feeling that we need to, you know, keep up our reading, and that we somehow want ourselves to continue to read at the rate that we did in like holiday season when we're busy doing other things. Like, it's totally normal that you have less time for your hobbies, right? And I think like especially if you watch booktube, then there's so many people that read so many books and it's fantastic, and honestly bless them that they can read so much. But I know that I sometimes get like very stressed and I think like, ooh, should I be reading that many books? Should I like make more time for myself so I can read that amount of books? And then when I don't do it because I'm busy with uni work, I kind of feel bad about myself. And I just think that's very unnecessary energy spent on feeling bad about yourself for something that really doesn't matter in the end. When you think about it, does it really matter how many books you read? Because here's the thing, okay? When we ask ourselves the question, how do I make time to read? The answer to that question is really the same as the question, how do I make time for myself? when I'm studying. It's not really about making time to read, it's just generally more of a, how do I make time to do the things that I like doing? That's the real question, right? And if you decide to fill your own free time with watching Netflix or going to see friends, that's totally okay, and I don't think you should feel bad about not using that time to read, because of course you only have this amount of free time and you can spend it on whatever you want. There's enough stress in like university and homework and stuff. You don't need to bring that stress into your hobbies. You know, like reading is something that we all do for fun, and then sometimes I can make it like a chore for myself, like something that I should be doing, that I should be doing more of. But if you're doing something for fun, it doesn't really matter how much you do it. It's about how much you enjoy doing it. But I do understand it that, you know, you just want to read your books. You just wish you had just as much time as before when you were free. You just wish you had that time again to read your books, and now suddenly you have to spend like the entire day reading articles and watching lectures, and you're just like, I wish I was reading my book. But what I think is that the question shouldn't be how to read more. The question should be how to read well. You know, because sometimes I'm like so busy with the idea of like, oh, you know, I need to read more books. I want to finish all these books this month, so whenever I have the time to read, I really focus on reading it fast, and I'm constantly thinking about like, ooh, I should read this amount of pages so I can finish this book by then. I'm very focused on basically finishing the book and having it done so I can read another book, and I'm not really focusing at all on the book. Well, of course I'm focusing on the book itself when I'm reading it, but there's just a lot of unnecessary focus on getting it done so I can also read the other books. And again, I was thinking about that, and I was like, that's a lot of energy unnecessarily spent on things that really don't matter. You know, when I have the time to read, it shouldn't be about, ooh, better finish this book quickly so I can read more books. It should be about, oh, now I have my time to read, better focus on the quality of reading, right? Better focus on enjoying reading. But I do understand the problem here. At least here's, I think, also a problem. I don't know if other people can relate to this, but the thing that I have is that you are studying all day if you're in uni. I don't know how many of you are, but I think a lot of you guys are somewhere like working or in uni, and then you spend the entire day just like focusing and like reading articles and watching lectures. You know, in the morning you think, ooh, when I'm gonna come home, I'm gonna read my book, and then you come home and you're just so tired of reading articles the entire day that you're like, I'm just gonna watch Netflix. I don't wanna spend more time looking at words on paper. I just did that all day. At least that's kind of the problem for me, is that I do want to read, but like my reading energy is kind of down because I spent the entire day reading for uni. Carolina Abstracta asked on my Twitter what to read when feeling tired. I would recommend here to just read something light and just easy, but also if you're really tired and you can't focus on a book, there's nothing wrong with just not reading. Like if you're really tired and you kind of just want to chill and relax and do something that doesn't require a lot of brain power, and you just want to watch Netflix, then that's fine. Like if you're tired, clearly what your body doesn't need is being forced into reading a book, so then don't. No one's forcing you to. You're the only one that's forcing yourself to read, okay? No one's telling you that you should read 10 books a month. You're telling yourself that. You don't need to tell yourself that. I do have some tips, but we'll get to that. I make booktube videos, so I know that every month I'm gonna make a wrap-up video, and I'm gonna say how many books I've read. And lately I've been trying to not say that. Like I used to always say, ooh, I had a super great reading month because I read like 6 books, and then other times I would say, oh, I had a terrible reading month because I only read 3 books. And I don't know if anyone noticed this, probably not, but I kind of cut that out of my vocabulary, and instead I don't focus on how many books I read. I say, ooh, I had a really great reading month because I read a lot of great books, or I had a bad reading month because I didn't really enjoy most of the books that I read. And it's not really, I try to focus a little bit less on the quantity of books that I'm reading but it's still always a little bit in the back of my head. And then we have this question from Anais on Twitter that I think really gets down to the crux of the matter, and she basically asked how to put yourself in a good mental state to stop associating reading with work, or how to not view reading as an effort. I think this comes down to how we see reading as work, as something that we need to do, something that we have to do, because like when you think about it, reading for yourself is completely different from reading from work, you know, because you're just reading for your own enjoyment, like escapism, completely different worlds. That's different than when you're doing it for like an academic article or something. The only reason that they can feel similar is because in both cases we feel like we have to do it, and we feel like we need to read it fast and finish it, and it's about like getting that result. So if you want to separate the two, you have to stop viewing reading for fun as something that you also have to do, that you need to finish, that you need to read a certain amount of. Because if you get rid of that, then suddenly there's no similarities to your reading for work and the reading that you do for yourself, because in the end the reading that you do for yourself is just because of escapism, because of learning about cool, interesting, different characters and escaping to different worlds, and there's no need to add that stress factor to reading for yourself. And I think if you knocked it over. So I think if we all collectively try to get rid of this idea that reading is something that we have to do, that we have to read a certain amount, that we have to read certain books, and just see it as something that we do for ourselves that has no targets or results added to it, then you get rid of the stress, and then you see that it's really just, it's like self-care. It's like taking a moment for yourself to do something about your hobby. Okay, so that was kind of what I wanted to say about this topic before we get into the tips. I think we all want to be able to read more when we're busy, but I think it's very important that when we're doing that, we really focus on quality and taking that time for ourselves and having fun with our hobbies, and not necessarily on making time to read just so I can read enough. You're making time to read just so that, because you deserve it, you know, because you deserve to take that time for yourself. Okay, so let's get to the tips. The first tip that I have, because we just talked about how sometimes, you know, well, not sometimes, just most of the times really, you're so tired because you spent the entire day in the lecture hall or, you know, behind your laptop. So my solution to this is that although I'm tired of reading, I'm not tired of taking in stories. So then I really opt for an audiobook. Like when I'm cooking, for example, or if I'm cleaning, that's a fantastic moment to just listen to an audiobook and get some of your reading done through that, because then you can just like really get lost in the story, but you don't really have to focus on the paper, because so it's not as tiring. So I feel like when I'm too tired to read like a physical book, I can still listen to audiobooks. Cat's Reading Adventures asked me on Twitter how to get started with audiobooks. I can't seem to get into them. I keep getting distracted. I totally get this. I was like this as well for a long time. I was like, I don't like audiobooks. They're not for me. I don't like them. Turns out I just wasn't reading audiobooks that I enjoyed. Like it was the story, not the audiobook. But what I noticed really helped me was I first got into podcasts, and I listened to some podcasts, and that kind of it's a little bit more casual, and that also made me get used to the idea of like listening to something while doing something else. And I think that might be like a great like segue into reading audiobooks. And then on top of that, if you're getting distracted, I'd recommend not do something else while you're listening to an audiobook. I think there's this idea that when you listen to an audiobook, you definitely also have to be doing something else, but there's nothing wrong with just sitting and listening to an audiobook. Like when you're watching this video, you're basically just sitting and listening and watching. So if you can do that, you can also sit and just listen. It might feel a little weird, but it's really not that weird, and it's a great way to consume some nice audiobook stories. It's like watching a movie, except you're not watching anything, you're just listening. You do get used to it pretty quickly, so I highly recommend just listening to some more audiobooks. Okay, and then the other tip, it's gonna sound kind of like an obvious one, but that is to just make time. Like the answer to the question, how do I make time to read more, is the same as the question, how do I just make more time to do anything when I'm at university. Like, you know, like the same way you make time to meet your friends, the same way you make time to like watch that movie and have that movie night, that same way you can make time to read. Okay, so many people asked about how to like manage the time management, like if you have a lot of stuff to do, like how do you make time to read? And I think this really comes down to the question, it's not just about how to make time to read, it's just how to make time in general, how to make free time. And that's difficult, I get it. I'm not perfect at this, but there is like one way that I kind of get around procrastinating. I mean, you don't have to like schedule it. I mean, you can if you want to, but I often just think to myself like, ooh, once I'm done doing this, I have a bit of free space there. And instead of just leaving it like that, and then probably it's gonna be filled up with me either starting to do something else of work or studying, or I'm gonna fill it up with just like randomly watching YouTube. Instead, I just consciously think to myself, oh, I have some free time there. I can read a little bit in my book. And then don't rush. Like if you only have half an hour to read, like you don't have to rush and think, oh my gosh, I only have half an hour, so I definitely need to get a lot of reading done, otherwise it's like a waste of my time. No, just like accept that you have half an hour of reading and then just enjoy that half an hour. Try not to look too much at the pages that you're reading, which I do a lot. I also just often look at how many pages I've read, and I'm trying to do that a little bit less. I don't know if other people do this as well, but there used to be a time where I was like constantly looking at how many pages I had read, and again, unnecessary energy spent. And also, if you have some free time, you don't have to read. Like, don't force yourself to read, because I think that's like a surefire way to get yourself in a reading slump. But yeah, it does come down to the fact, like, make time for yourself, you know? The way you make free time for yourself when you're studying, do that and then use that free time to read. Something that I do often is I like procrastinate my homework until the evening, because I'm like, well, I still have the entire evening, I still have the entire day, so I still have all the time. So then you procrastinate, and then while you're procrastinating, you're just gonna do kind of like not super fun things, because you kind of feel guilty about the fact that you're not studying, so you're not gonna pick up a book because you're like, no, I should be studying. So instead you just end up an hour like on the internet. But if you like tell yourself, no, I should study now because tonight I have like my free time, like I plan to do specifically watch this movie or read this book, then it becomes so much easier for me to not procrastinate, because procrastination, at least for me, comes from the idea that I have all the time in the world. So if you make a plan for yourself, plan to do this evening, then I procrastinate less. I don't know if that was a helpful tip, but that's kind of how I do it. And my second tip is to read on your commute if you have a commute. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but at least in the Netherlands, it's very common for especially students to use public transport. And public transport is like the perfect moment to read something. Like, whip out your book and read something on the train. Now, I do have to admit that personally I very often fall asleep. Like if it's early in the morning and I'm on the train and I try to read a book, I do actually fall asleep sometimes. Like I have a really hard time staying up. Also, if I listen to audiobooks, I also fall asleep. So sometimes on my commute, the only thing I can do is listen to really loud music, just to make sure that I don't fall asleep. But generally, I always have a book with me so that, you know, when I do feel like reading, I can on the train. Like, it's always a possibility on the train that I feel like reading. Or if you have a commute where you constantly have to like change vehicles, like sometimes I have to like every 10 minutes switch trains and it's really annoying to whip out your book every time, audiobook. Perfect solution, because you can just keep listening while you're walking everywhere. Like last year, almost all of my reading was done on my commute because I had a 2-hour commute every day. And that's a lot of time to read. And then my last tip is to put your reading in a routine. Let me just share with you my morning routine real quick. In the mornings, I used to, while having breakfast, watch some YouTube, but I recently changed that by, while having breakfast, read a little bit in a book, so that in the morning you kind of get like 20 minutes of reading done, which isn't a lot. And I would also say that I don't really use this with fiction books, because you know that the tip is always, you know, always take a book with you, so that even when you have like 5 minutes to spare, you can read. I feel like with fiction books, if you only read like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you're not really in it. So in the morning, when I only have like 10 to 20 minutes to read, I tend to pick up a non-fiction book that needs to slowly be digested. You know, there are certain non-fiction books that you definitely need to read like a little bit of every day instead of like 2 hours at a time. And the morning is like the perfect time for that. And because it's in a routine, it just almost always happens. And I'm trying to create an evening routine where I read like maybe half an hour or an hour before bed, because I always tell myself that I'm gonna read before bed, and then I go to bed really late, and then I'm like, I can't afford to just read half an hour or an hour now, because I should have been in bed like an hour ago. I know that if I create an evening routine that works, I can just create this routine where I read like at least half an hour every day before bed. And because you do that daily, that really adds up, and that's like a great way to implement more reading in your life, because that routine is never gonna be taken up by uni or work. I hope that, generally speaking, you don't do any homework during your morning or evening routine, so you know that, you know, that time's never gonna be taken up by like your busy life, because you're just scheduling it in moments that are always happening every single day. And those were the tips that I had. I know it's like only 4 tips. I wish I had more, but I think again it all just comes down to making time for yourself. The conclusion of this little discussion video is that you should focus on the fact that you're taking time for yourself, to focus on your hobby, reading, and it's not about making time just so you can read as much as possible. I'm not there yet. I'm just trying to kind of implement these tips in my own life as well, to just kind of more focus on, you know, quality over quantity. We all know it's important, but we all forget it all the time. Anyway, if you do have some really helpful tips on how to read more when you're busy, definitely leave them in the comments below so we can all kind of help each other. I would love to have your thoughts on this topic. I feel like I just rambled for like 20 minutes straight. I don't know if this is interesting, so just let me know. I thought it would just be fun to have a more like chill, chatty video where we just discuss a topic and maybe think about it a little bit more. Anyway, if you did like this video, give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on my social media at @thebookleo on everything, and I will see you soon in another video. Goodbye!